Thank you. This is the Thursday, October 17th, 2024. Will be the whole meeting. Okay. We're not live. We call the meeting order. We're going to do a roll call in a second. We're not live streaming this meeting tonight, but the video recording will be available on the Village YouTube channel. This is our temporary home, although it's a little cozy. So we pose and see if we got a bigger room. The village is doing renovations on the chambers, so we're out of there from starting now. We're grateful to the public in their face. Because of village recent public comment rules, when we have a committee of the whole immediately followed by a regular board meeting, we're not going to have public comment during the committee of the whole, pushing that back. For non-agenda items, we're pushing that back to the 7th. If you're here to talk about something not on the committee of the whole agenda and not on the village board agenda, then come back to 7. I want to talk about something on this agenda. That was when we get to that item on the agenda. I'll ask for comments at that time, and all public comments are limited to 3 minutes. With that, could we have a roll call for the committee of the whole?
Trustee Hallwax. Here. Trustee Listener.
Here.
Trustee Mealopoulos.
Here.
Trustee Underdunk. Here. Trustee Rubin. Trustee Scott.
Here.
President Rowley.
Here. Okay, the next item on the agenda is discussion regarding possible updates to the village's ordinance regulating backyard chickens on private property. And I'll ask our public works manager, Walmsley, and our development services director, Taylor Baxter, to present on this.
Thank you, President Rowan. Just as a historical overview of the keeping chickens on resident properties issue in Glencoe back in 2021, former trustee Mulvaney brought forth the idea of allowing residents to keep chickens on their private residential lots. After considerable research into other communities' ordinances and soliciting public comments from residents of Glencoe, we brought this information to the village board after several meetings of discussing what would be appropriate parameters for instituting this program. The village board did enact an ordinance that allowed our residents to keep chickens on their private residential property with some restrictions. Some of those restrictions include limiting the number of chickens on the property to 4 total, restricting it to hens only, so no roosters. We require them to have a coop. We require them to make sure that the yard was completely fenced in. Require them to require the coops to have certain minimum square footage per chicken. And we also required that each resident that wanted to keep a chicken had to obtain an accessory animal license from the village. And the village board limited those licenses to 10 total. That is set in the ordinance. Currently, we have 2 licenses that have been completely gone through the whole process and have been issued. That's for 555 Greenwood and 123 Euclid. We have 2 more that are currently in the process of getting approved. One I know is almost done. We should just have to get some of the final inspections. Earlier this year, the neighbor of 555 Greenwood reached out to the village. She had several concerns about the chickens next door to her. She received complaints revolved around the noise of the chickens and the appearance of the coop. We did reach out to the owner of 555 Greenwood and our community service officer at the time, tried to work out some mitigations that they could do to kind of reduce some of these complaints, including some behavior modification of the chicken, keeping them in the coop for a longer period of time to hopefully cut down the noise. I would note that 555 Greenwood is one of the license holders and that they do comply with all of the conditions of their license. However, the neighbor was not satisfied and she attended our September 19th village board meeting and expressed her displeasure with situations of chickens next door. At that meeting, the village board directed staff to do more research and to come back with some options in terms of things that could be done to mitigate this situation and improve the situation for the neighbors at 555 Greenwood. The staff again look at a lot of our neighboring communities and communities in the area and seeking out some other things that we don't do that we may be able to implement to help out the situation. First is screening requirements. Currently, there are no screening requirements for the coops or the yard, but we could enact an ordinance that requires some sort of higher fencing or permanent vegetation to screen the visual. But we don't believe this would have any impact on the noise factor. Second factor is limiting chickens to a coop or a run. So currently the way the ordinance reads is that chickens may have free roam of the fenced in rear yard. However, we could limit that area further, that they would have to construct a limited run in their yard to further restrict the areas in which the chickens can roam in the yard. The next two I'm going to let Bill Baxter talk about, the yard size and coop location setbacks.
So right now, there is no minimum yard size for these permits. You can have them on any size lot as long as we meet setback requirements. When this ordinance allowing chickens was enacted a couple years ago, the board decided that in cases where a coop, zoning would allow a coop to be set back from property lines less than 10 feet, the 10-foot setback should apply. Typically, an accessory structure, these are accessory structures, the main structure can be as little as 5 feet from a rear yard. In this zoning district, the side setback would be 8 feet. But because of that overriding aspect of the ordinance, the required setback is 10 feet from the side. I would mention that there's been some talk in this particular case at 555 Greenwood that maybe a side yard. I've just noted that this is per the zoning code a rear yard, and if this coop was next door, an interior lot being a lot that's on the corner, it would actually have fewer restrictions where the coop could be. There's a greater side yard setback in that corner side yard, which restricts where the coop could go. This particular instance with the corner yard, if you move the coop closer to the side street, potentially would have to be the zoning code requires it to be further and further off the rear lot line. That could create some weird situations where you move it further away from the side property line, it would move further up in the lot, closer to the houses. Again, 10 feet on from the rear and side is the requirement on the particular lot we've talked about. And the coop in question that's been discussed is meets those setback requirements. But the village board would have an option if they want to amend that ordinance of either requiring larger lot sizes to have a license. You could appropriate. That could apply to new licenses only, and your grandfather and existing licenses under the lot size. Or could apply to all licenses. You could also have the ability to further increase that required setback.
The final mitigation option that we developed is neighbor advisory notices. This would be somehow notifying the neighbor that the resident is going to change. This could be a spectrum of different options, actually. It could just be something like a courtesy notice, a letter that's sent to the neighbors that just alerts them that they're going to be chickens next door. It could also be something similar to like an SUP process where there is some sort of hearing and neighbors could give public comments and some approval board would take those into account when approving accessory animal. So next, like your feedback in terms of the different options that we presented here, and we can get some ideas in terms of what if we want to amend the ordinance, and if so, how we want to amend it, and whether we want to apply new restrictions to the current license holders, or grandfather.
Folks here who want to talk about this, you want to hear from them. Most of our two new board members did not go in. Let me just go back to what we did. One of our trustees thought the idea. My general bent is our residents ask us to do something. I want the first answer to be yes, not no. So at the time we did it, we looked at other communities. Some communities prohibit chickens, some allow it. Some communities have more restrictions than we do, including, my recollection is, some restrictions we had in a big yard. We didn't do that. At the time, we made our decision. Somebody said, remember this, I said it. We were doing our best. We're allowing this, but we were going to wait and see what the results were. And if the results required a change, then we could look at changing it. And that's sort of where we are. So I think all of us have read the letters we received. What we did after first adopted the ordinance, and it was really pretty evenly divided among student members. Don't allow it, do allow it. Got about 15 members on each side. I can't remember one. There were a few more on one side than the other, and I just don't remember which side it was. We read the letters we received. We heard from the next door neighbor who's unhappy, and we take that seriously. Not look to me, or I think any of us, the officials in Hatfields and McCoys, where the neighbors just don't like each other. And therefore, that's not what's happening here. So, in the letters that we looked at, there were, there was, I saw one comment that said, look, it's only one complaint. Don't change the ordinance for one complaint. I don't accept that because we only have 2 licenses, and I'm not sure. So, one complaint is 50% problem. Also, I saw one letter that said, well, it's not clear any of these fixes are really going to fix the problem. Well, we do have to look at that. I find this really challenging. We have heard from them. We have neighbors who said, we came to Glencoe because you have chickens. That, although we did say we would look at what we were going to do depending on the results of chickens. We have another neighbor next door who says it's pretty intolerable. sent some of our staff out. Got different answers. One staff member was there when the chickens were pretty loud, and reported back to us, this is loud. Went out, the chickens were fine. Bird cats are supposed to be fine. Anyway, I find this difficult. 50 years ago, there was an article in the New Yorker written by this great writer, Susan Orlean, about her chickens. One vignette I remember, she had a sick chicken and she brought it to the vet, and there were all these dogs and cats. She was crying, like, chicken is sick. So I get that if you have chickens, you like them, and they're part of the family. That's serious. At the same time, if you're the next door neighbor, then it's intolerable if we take that seriously. So we want to try to figure this out. Very few Glencoe residents are involved. That's often true. But it's very important to start about, so we're going to try and get it right. We're taking everybody's. With that,
Trustee Rubin has joined.
okay.
So we should just
All right.
acknowledge that.
So, Trustee Rubin is now a bionic guy. He got his second hip on Monday. So he's home for a couple of surgery. He's asked to participate remotely via Zoom in compliance with our established policy that allows that. Physical or present. And I just want to make sure with the trustees, there's a consensus that we accommodate trustee. Everybody's agreed with that. Okay.
So I recommend just a quick motion to seat trustee Rubin.
Is there a motion to seat trustee Rubin?
Motion to seat trustee Rubin virtually.
Good move. It's been seconded. We need a roll call or vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, back to the chickens. I have a sign-in sheet. I don't know for sure that everybody has a sign-in sheet wants to talk about hens. But I know that the first two folks do. Let's see this, Al Kosher.
That's correct.
Okay. So first, Mr. Al Kosher, Philip Al Kosher, come on up.
Before I go, I want to give trustees copy of my speech now. I'm going to read it, so I got to read it.
I'm not going to charge you with that.
I guess if you can pass it down, I think it would help. Hello, Glencoe. We started a community that we embraced and raising in sustainable living. We purchased our home with knowledge that Glencoe codified chickens in 22. Our birds are older than our two boys, whom they share a great bond. They're our pets. They have names. So we got the permits and licensing prior to moving in. We set out a welcome mat for my family. Glencoe offered us walkable parks, greatest lake on earth, proximity to medical services for disabled veterans, and a village board that advocated in nearly every communication for sustainability. As that disabled veteran, my pets, my garden are important for relieving symptoms related to PTSD. My story includes an immediate neighbor who never speaks to us. No ongoing issue was known until we received a letter regarding fencing variation. We welcome the public safety's involvement in determining whether our pets are a nuisance. If it is as bad as she described, then public safety can easily see it. We provided the village over an hour of video and audio of our birds, just being birds throughout the day, multiple different times of day. But I don't want to talk about that too much. I wanted to just go over the proposed remediations. We just have some comments. Any new mitigations considered by this board ought to have like a grandfathering clause for those who currently have the birds. The current ordinance already provides for revocation of these animals' licenses for offensive noise. We do support screening requirements. We are more than willing to work with the board and our neighbor on screening solutions. I want to plant mature evergreen trees around that coop. We sent plans to the board to that effect. We are opposed to limiting chickens to the coop or the run because these are social animals and they're natural foragers. You're gonna have an adverse effect on their behavior, especially if you want to limit noise. And our family benefits from socializing with them. A run is typically a very small enclosed space. It's extremely difficult to interact with our pets. We're opposed to minimum lot sizes. The majority of the village wouldn't qualify for Thanksgiving. These are small lots. Most families with children live on lots similar to mine. We're more than willing to screen our coop with our current lot size. Current setback requirements are conservative as they are. It aligns with ordinances from other towns. While we agree that a courtesy notice system for neighbors would be helpful, neighbors disparaging neighbors for the hobbies in public forum create additional discordance. It would also be extremely subjective. Some folks have 2 neighbors, some have 3 or 4. The existing ordinance already provides for licensing or revocation, like I said, for offensive noises. And we encourage public safety's involvement as an independent third-party investigator for all of these concerns. The ordinance on renewing the animal license is a prescription to protect the welfare of the animals and the people living beside them. As responsible pet owners, we follow all ordinance requirements, offering folks an opportunity to have a pet on the basis of a pet's welfare, only to take that pet away because someone doesn't like the appearance of a coop is kind of offensive.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
For about 10 minutes over.
Thank you for your time.
Because you're stuck. That's the rules, right?
I get it.
Problem for you. That Lana, I'll put you.
That's right.
Come on up. We won't start. I need to start.
My name is Svetlana, and I live at 555 Greenwood Avenue. We started to raise chickens 6 years ago after struggling with infertility and miscarriages for over 2 years. I deeply cared for the baby chicks. I taught them to eat grains and drink from poultry water needles. 6 months after getting the birds, we got pregnant with our baby boy. Our journey with those feathered friends have been incredibly rewarding. We knew that many people are not familiar with the idea of chickens. When we moved to Glencoe, we made a cautious effort of introducing ourselves to our neighbors and established open line of communication. We never heard back from our neighbors on South Avenue. No issues were brought to us by them until the zoning letter. My husband stopped by neighbors immediately to inquire about the matter. The neighbor was polite and explained that her house is sitting high and that she can see our coop and hear the birds. We offered to work together to address those concerns, but the neighbor felt that the higher fence would be her best solution. Philip and I want to improve the situation, including planting evergreen trees to provide additional screening. We've also monitored our hens closely and have not observed any excessive noise. I urge the village to allow us to proceed this proposed plan to implement screening around the coop. Trees can provide 6 to 10 decibels of sound reduction, which is equivalent to 2 or 3 times of the distance increase. I'm an engineer, so I can speak for that. It would help with the view and muffle the tiny clucking sounds. Additionally, I request the public safety to be involved in assessing if there are any noise disturbance caused by our hens. It says in the village report that some staff observed the noise and some didn't. Well, let me ask you, was the hen sound long, loud, offensive? Or was it a short cluck and compatible with the ambient noise? I know my birds. They are not loud and most of the time are completely quiet. Any other issues with our yard ought to be addressed between our neighbors and ourselves. I'm a first-gen immigrant from a culture that values working hard. Taking a picture of and sharing a photo despairingly of our yard during the working gardening season is inappropriate. We've removed invasive species and planted over 200 native plants just this summer alone. And we have the impression there is an issue with our backgrounds. We urge you to support the responsible chicken keeping in Glencoe by allowing residents to raise hens in accordance with the existing ordinance. We promote environmental sustainability, education, and a more vibrant community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and gold star. Okay, the next comment, if it's about patents, is Catherine Seacom.
Okay, I'll go before her. She wants it off the top, but she wants to go after me. Kevin Hurd.
As long as you're on the list, that's.
I'm on the list, thanks. Yes.
Okay,
Am I?
no, absolutely not. Fine.
Good evening, members of the board. I'm Kevin Harvey. I am a Glencoe native, 3 years old. I was raised here and I have a pleasure of raising my 3 kids at Glencoe now. Substitute teacher in the schools, or was, until COVID. I was co-chair of the Glencoe caucus, resident of Go Green Glencoe. I work with Friends of the Green Bay Trail, Go Green Wilmette, Go Green Illinois. Environmental responsibility and sustainable living has been one of my concerns, and I was happy to see Glencoe making significant strides in this direction, helped in large part by the formation of the Sustainability Task Force. 12 years ago, well, Dan says 11, I stood here in the other building in support of backyard hens with a PowerPoint presentation. And since then, we've seen the benefits to sustainable living and occasional disagreements. I think it took 10 years after that talk to actually adopt. Recently, one neighbor voiced a complaint about backyard chickens. And while it's important to address concerns, we need to consider whether one complaint justifies broader restrictions. Should all dogs in Glencoe face new restrictions because I don't like the barking yappy dog next door? And that's real. We had neighbors a few years ago. My kids called them the party animals. Party outside, right outside our window. And that was their right, but it did disturb us. And we just had to work it out with them. They weren't too loud too often. Neighbors should learn to communicate respectfully with one another, try to work out problems they may have. Lifestyle differences should not only be tolerated, but celebrated. I've been in this position before. When I first advocated for backyard chickens, the neighbors sent letters to 217 of my neighbors. And that's partly because the board made me get a petition. I'm not blaming the board. They wanted a petition to show support for backyard hens. I got hundreds of them. But because I got the petition, it was then publicly known that I was advocating. A neighbor got angry. He sent a very disparaging letter to 217 of my neighbors and told them that I was unconcerned about the community just for wanting this. He even accosted my wife on the street and yelled at her and brought her to tears. So a little bit Hatfield McCoy stuff going on. My family compost has a garden, would like to have a few chickens ourselves. We care for our community and we care for our environment. And we found that many people in Glencoe feel the same way. I hope the board will handle the situation with fairness and sensitivity. Rather than viewing one complaint as grounds for sweeping changes that would amount to collective punishment, let's encourage respectful communication, problem solving, and appreciation for the diverse ways that we contribute to making Glencoe the great place to live that it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Harvey next, or you?
Sure.
Evening. My name is Catherine Seckham. I'm a lifelong resident of Glencoe, 75 years. I live at 396 Washington Avenue on a 0.27 acre lot. I'm a retired hospice nurse. I'm planning on getting chickens in the spring. As a young child growing up in Glencoe, my grandmother had 5 chickens on Jefferson Street. She had a large garden that we attended together with her chickens. I learned how chickens are gentle, quiet, and social animals who enjoy interacting with people and are good for the environment. For me, they're therapeutic. I live around the corner from Lana and Phil's house on Greenwood. I didn't know they had chickens until recently. I thought their chicken coop was a playhouse. I saw Lana and the 2 boys playing with their chickens in their backyard. Lana showed me her organic garden, the setup for her chickens. It was well organized and clean. She's very friendly, open to share her passion for her chickens in her garden. After visiting her several times, being with the chickens in the yard, hearing their soft clucking, I find it hard to believe that any neighbor couldn't hear the chickens with their windows open or closed. I would like to address some of the suggestions the staff was recommending changing a bit. That chickens be confined to a cage area and not to be free roaming in a fenced yard. The chickens would be unhealthy, bored, and probably would not even produce eggs, which is another benefit of having chickens. Limiting yard size, this would eliminate many residents from being chicken keepers in Glencoe. In conclusion, I feel we wouldn't even be here tonight if her neighbors would have talked with Lana and Phil about the chickens, instead of going to the village and trying to make changes that affect Glencoe's residents because of one complaint.
Thank you. Okay. I'll just get your name wrong. Let me get my name wrong, so, yeah. Okay. So this is a combination. Pronunciation, but. Mr. Harvey.
I think you got that right.
Oh, whoa. See, don't go. Ms. Thompson.
Hello, everyone. I am the said neighbor.
We're not mad.
Well,
We're not.
everyone else in this room is.
We're not. You didn't do anything wrong.
I just want to say a few things because I've already spoke a few weeks ago. And I want to say that we did welcome our neighbors. We brought them a welcome basket. We welcomed them to the neighborhood and to Glencoe. With that said, we lived next door for about a year with the chickens and the noise. And I know everyone has said it's not loud. I have recordings. We had Rich from the zoning committee over, or the zoning position, sorry, I can't think of the right word. He witnessed how loud the chickens are. They have woken my children up. Now I understand there's one chicken that's louder than the others. So I just want to say that in terms of guidelines, I just would ask that you consider lot size, proximity. We live on top of each other, and it just, I think there has to be a larger yard in order to accommodate a large coop and several chickens. I know that they roam the yard, and I don't think it's necessarily a terrible thing to have chickens in your yard. I just personally feel the proximity that we live next to each other so closely and the noise and the sight, I just don't think it's fair. And I don't know if our property value would even be the same, if people would want to move into our home if we were to sell it, knowing that there are chickens next door. I think that people would potentially think twice about that in terms of, you know, trying to sell our home and the value of our home. So, thank you.
Okay, now. Your turn. I apologize.
My name is Joe Artebase, 322 Hawthorne Avenue in the notorious Green Bay corridor. Sir Lodging from Green Bay Road. I am happy to be here tonight to speak up for a new friend of mine in the community, which is Phil and Lana. And the folks that want to have chickens in their backyard. How many chickens are they allowed to have? They were 4. I think that's a lot. And I do feel for you too, madam. I had neighbors next to me on Hawthorne Avenue that had the zoning on my property reduced because it was zoned multiple housing. Because they just put a huge addition to the back of their house. And we're upset about the possibility that someone would buy my property and put up a condominium unit like is next to me, and therefore detract from the view out their new master bedroom window. Well, that's not necessarily related, but it is. Because in Glencoe, as in probably any community, what we have grown up to assume that we have some type of authority, freedom in how we use our property. It turns out that what we do with our property is mostly determined by what our neighbors want us to do with our property. That's something that I do not condone or support. That's my generation. So this is a sensitive issue, but I feed birds. I've fed birds in my backyard for 40 years. You might say a serious bird feeder. My neighbors that wanted to reduce the zoning, did reduce zoning on my property, asked me to stop because one day they found a dead rabbit in the backyard and accused me of attracting foxes because I was feeding birds. Well, the police came over and checked me out and told me to stop feeding. One complaint, and of course I cut back. But then after more communication with the neighbor, I put more fears. The point is, it's a sensitive issue, but I would urge the board, the committee, to keep it as simple as possible. Keep this a simple issue. My neighbors have a new German Shepherd dog, had it for over a year now, it's a puppy. Very loud. I've seen 3 generations of families go through the house next door to me. Kids playing, parties, dogs, loud, yeah. So, you know what? I deal with it and try to love my neighbor.
All right, thank you very much. Is Mark?
Hello. I'm Shayna Martin. I live at 123 Euclid. And I thought I would share a little bit about my experience as one of the very few chicken keepers in Glencoe. I think I was the first, no big deal. It's been awesome. 2 years ago, when chickens were approved, I was there, thank you. We spent a month and more money than I'd like to admit building our coop. We're really proud of it. And frankly, it's adorable. Next came the chickens. We got 4 teeny, fluffy little baby chicks that we hand raised in our house until they were big enough to move out into the coop. Our daughters named them Dolly, Rosie, Tina, and Rainbow, which is exactly what happens when you let a 4-year-old name a pet. We suddenly became quite popular. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that every week we had people, friends, but also some Glencoe folks we didn't know, asked to come over to see the chickens. They wanted to feed them, hold them, watch them scratch and peck for bugs in the grass. And I'll tell you, watching happy hens do their thing out in nature is very soothing. It's been 2 years now, and I'm often asked if I'm still into it. I think my friends and family thought it might be a phase. But honestly, it's been so fun and rewarding that I don't mind the chores that accompany taking care of new animals. We also have 2 dogs. It's safe to say we're animal people. There are a few proposed changes to the chicken guidelines that I'd like to speak about. Number 1, limiting chickens to their coop. Chickens should not be cooped up. That is exactly where the phrase comes from. They are happiest out in nature, but of course with proper protections to keep them safer, like a fence already in the ordinance. When they're forced to live in a small contained environment, like being locked in a coop all the time, they will develop bad behavior. They bully each other out of boredom and sometimes even to death. I'd also venture to guess that many folks in this room spend the extra few bucks on those pasture-raised eggs at the grocery store. Eggs from hens that are allowed to free range are healthier, more nutrient dense, and of course more delicious. And frankly, limiting chickens to their coop would be borderline cruel. Number 2, the minimum yard size. I am fortunate to have a large backyard. Our property is over ½ an acre, but I know that the majority of Glencoe homes do not. And enforcing a minimum size would automatically eliminate most of the residents, and it just simply does not seem fair. So in closing, chicken keeping has been a really fun adventure filled with learning, joy, and a lot of poop. It is rewarding for me and my family and our neighbors and friends, absolutely 100% of whom love the chickens. We've never once received a complaint. And I'm grateful to live in a community where diversity of thought and lifestyles are accepted. And since I have 19 seconds left, I'll just add that they're quite quiet. They do do what's called an egg song. When they lay their egg, they're very proud and they sing about it. But it's no different than a cardinal or a raven or any of the other birds native around here. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. Last, I can't get the last name. I can't read it. It's handwriting, my handwriting is bad too. Steve at 465 Ave.
Jarmel.
Sure.
So I do have a couple questions. So the two existing permits, Greenwood, right? Euclid, right? So those are the only two houses that could have chickens in Glencoe.
So far. So far.
So what would be the penalty if someone has chickens? That's not one of those two.
They've been able to take them out.
Okay. So the plot chickens, okay? So I do want to, since this is recorded, I do want to say, we like our neighbors very much. They're lovely people. We're not chicken people. I would like to reiterate, we live on small lots. Our next door neighbors on Adams have a couple of chickens. Apparently they don't have the proper permits. But I did a lot of reading on 22 and I fully admit I didn't pay a lot of attention in 22. But I did read that the majority of the comments were against. And I read all the letters, but I thought I saw that the majority of the comments were against. And for me, other than presidential elections, usually the majority wins. And I just feel like Kenilworth doesn't have it, Wilmette doesn't have it, Winnetka doesn't have it. These are our peers. And from a property value standpoint, I feel like, and I know you guys don't live next to chickens, I think there's an immediate deduction to my property value. I don't know if that's reflected in my property taxes. I would hope so, but I would hope that, this is something that perhaps a referendum could get sort of a majority voice versus just the people that are, showing up to a meeting. Because you do hear it. I've walked by her neighbor quite a bit. We only live a block and a half away. They can be loud. And if you live on 0.4 or 0.35 of an acre, you're on top of these people. And we don't live in South Barrington with 5-acre lots. And this isn't an agrarian community. This is one.
Thank you. Anybody, if there's no one else who's signed up, if there's anyone else that wants to talk about hens, chickens in your backyard, now's the chance. Okay. I'm going to invite board members to weigh in. Let me just say, we don't think anybody did anything wrong. I do not blame folks for taking advantage of our ordinance and trying out. I do not blame a neighbor who thinks it's too noisy or too ugly or whatever from coming in and expressing the old. This continues to be hard. Let me say, if there was one side or the other back in 2022 that had a majority, it was close. We have 80 or 8,900 people in town, probably got 40 letters. So there was no groundswell one way or the other. Say from my point of view, when our residents ask if they can do something, I would like the answer to be yes, provided we're not hurting our neighbors. I want to hear more about your issue where you think your neighbor got to change your zoning. That's not the way we do stuff here. Listen, I want to hear more about that. We don't think neighbors get to seriously, I don't think she's making it up. I think there's noise and it's impacting her. Is it gonna affect her property values? I have no idea. And everybody that comes to us in our witness says it's gonna affect the property values, but it might. So with that, let me ask the trustees to weigh in what they think in terms of, what can we do? To try to work this out. For now, folks, chickens. But it is important that people have a place they want to call home next door.
Question for the village attorney. Does our nuisance ordinance apply in any of this discussion?
Well, we would have to look at what the conditions are. A nuisance is always a very fact-based determination. And when something is specifically permitted by law within certain parameters, it would by definition not be a nuisance. So you couldn't say if someone was complying with all these things, you couldn't say it is a nuisance because it's actually a lot. Now, there are questions, and really what this is always about is that when you have a legal activity that it provides certain externalities, excess noise, runoff, odors and things like that. Considerably it could be, but the legality of it is probably a defense. So if someone's keeping chickens in the way that we require them to do it, that would be a valid defense.
I'm troubled by all this. I understand both points. Let me just say, if we think in order to make having hens acceptable, we have to have a larger yard. And there are some ordinances we saw that in 2022 that require that. If we think that's appropriate, I don't think it's fair for us to say, Thompson's too bad. We agree the yard needs to be bigger, otherwise it's unacceptably next door to it. But we're not planning it. So do we think the yards need to be bigger? Do we think, and I get the point. Seems to be requiring the chickens in a coop, that sounds like a bad idea. I'm persuaded that that's what the people that have chickens want. Not fair to the chickens who don't get a vote. But so what can be done to make this a little quieter? And if the answer is screening trees, then maybe we should be requiring that in some way. Or maybe we should say to the folks that have chickens, it's incumbent on you to create screening that makes it quiet. And we do have the ability with the current ordinance to pull the license if it doesn't work out there. And that, that's one thing we could think of. Maybe the chickens need to be further back from the neighbors than they are. And I don't know if there's a way to do that, but I take Ms. Thompson's concerns seriously.
I do think we need to address screening requirements that would mitigate the noise. So I think the issue here is noise and making more passive. And then identify, times of day or decibel level or whatever from the lot line, whatever is, audible, what those limits could be, so that if we would want to charge them with a nuisance, we have the ability to do.
So I would echo what you just said. This is way outside my area of expertise. I think that's probably true for the majority of us. But I do pride myself on being a neighbor. And so I guess I want to echo something that one of the residents said around really this feels like an issue between neighbors, first and foremost, and it seems reasonable to me that you all could work together to at least move the needle. It might not solve the problem, and then, you know, maybe we start looking at more village involvement, but it doesn't seem to me that there's been enough of that in this situation. I very much hear both sides of this argument, but it does kind of feel like a noisy dog situation. And so the idea that we would come in and start changing the ordinance sounds good to what Howard said about it, President Rowan said about, you know, 50% of the complaints, that's fair. But I just don't think we have enough data. And whatever we do common sense wise to tighten up the ordinance around chickens, which I support, I don't know that that could apply retroactively to people who have already invested, you know, time and resources in this hobby and for the most part without incident.
So I am concerned about the situation, because you just hate to see when neighbors are negatively impacted by something that's going on next door. And I would like to say, so it wasn't just the neighbor on the south who had complained about the chickens. We also received a letter from the neighbor on Greenwood. And there was no mention made of that, but that was in our package. And they frankly are probably within 10 feet or so of the chicken coop. In their letter, they said they had to keep the blinds down now in their kitchen because of that. And I'm very concerned. I mean, so what we have is we have a tight lot. We have the coop pushed toward the southern end of the lot. So you're really abutting the neighbors to the south. We don't have a lot of space here, and I'm not sure what screening is going to do if you're talking about screening a coop, but letting the chickens roam the yard. I'm not sure that we're solving any kind of issue like that. I'm actually concerned also about appearances, and I'm not sure what our accessory structure ordinance is regarding, you know, chicken coops and what they need to look like, what they need to be constructed of. But, you know, we have people who are really unhappy about this. And I think, you know, I think it's a shame when the village, you know, enacts some ordinances that then, you know, created other issues for the neighbors. And we do have, you know, 50%. And I'd say the house on Euclid sounds like a very good setup for it, you know, being on a half acre and having a lot more land and having what, you know, the owner described as a very cute little chicken coop. That is a different situation than what we have from so many of our lots in Glencoe that are frankly small. And I don't think that they are as well equipped to accommodate chickens.
But
I wanted to add back to you know, so if they aren't able to address or mitigate the, you know, the issues with noise and whatnot with screening, then they would not be able to keep that. They cannot meet the requirements, and they would effectively not be able to have it. So that might be an issue with the size. I thought.
by the way, there was a comment that most residents don't have big yards. You know, if the ordinance said you had to have a big yard, then most residents couldn't have chickens, but some could. And it was suggesting that's unfair. That's probably, you know, unfair, but we limited it to 10 licenses. So most residents in Glencoe cannot have chickens here. And so, all right, well, I've been trying to listen for consensus on the board, and to the extent we can find a consensus with everybody who's talking, I mean, we can do. one suggestion that we should just disallow this. And I think it's too soon to do that. There's a suggestion that, well, they're here, live next door, too bad. I don't think that's an okay answer either, but I think for the board, I don't think we're ready to say it has to be a half acre or big yards yet. Although I can imagine that we're coming with that. So going with trustee Michaelopoulos suggestion, we could put it on the folks that have chickens to make it quieter. And as I understand it, on our current ordinance, you're unable to make it quieter, then you may lose your license. Yeah, that's potentially subjective, but we got some data. We sent our staff out. The first report we got was loud. That's the real fact, even though I hear people say, oh, because you're quiet. Well, okay, apparently those weren't. If it's just an aberration, and it's like a barking dog that barks sometimes, okay. But I gather from next door neighbors that they think it's not an aberration. So, but maybe what we should do now, and by the way, I do not, nobody wants to get into a fight with their neighbors. Nobody wants to get in their neighbor's business, and I do not blame Ms. Thompson for not being out the door with the next door on it. I don't think so. We're here, and I guess what I would suggest is if you have pets, find a way to make it quieter for your neighbor. Because if you don't, we may have to amend the ordinance, we may have to just pull the license because the neighbors, they have rights too. And we will evaluate that to try, is this just like having a dog next door? Is it just like, I've had your neighbors, high school kids, and periodically they have really loud parties that go late at night. Okay. And that's like, but I gather from the complaint, that's not what your next door neighbor thinks. So I don't know if we're going to make anybody happy tonight. But we're trying. So what I think the board is saying is, if you have chickens, make it quiet. Next door neighbor is not. And do as best you can. Try streaming, try something to make it quieter, so that she doesn't have to come back. Because if she does come back, I think the trustees are going to start thinking about, okay, we got to do something. That's something that could be pulling license, it could be changing the ordinance. But I don't know what we would have done 2 years ago if the results we have today are what I did not anticipate this. I read up on it. The chicken pets, I got that. And I thought they're supposed to be quieter than they seem. So I think reflecting the board, we're not changing the 6 minute, we don't do anything, talk about it fast, but make it quieter. So that your neighbor doesn't feel she has to come in. Anybody else, is that consistent with what we're thinking?
change the ordinance to make it a little more strict?
We
We
should.
can't tonight.
Not
I think,
tonight,
I think the
but
question, I'd like to clarify
Yeah.
if I can, President Rowland.
Okay.
I have been taking notes relative to the comments of the trustees. It does appear that at least some additional research is being asked of staff. And I want to clarify that point, make sure that that's the direction that we're getting.
We should look for if there are ways that we could tweak our ordinance. So we can help enforce, make it quieter. There are actually things to be done. I'm just not positive.
Well,
what they are.
and I think that's to trustee Mealopolis's question before relative to additional screening options, if they exist, what that might mean, if there's a legitimate change in the noise levels that a screening option could include. Perhaps, I don't know if this was actually said, but I kind of heard pieces of this. Is there a way to limit how close chickens are allowed to roam relative to the property lines? That, is there a way for us to limit that? Maybe not necessarily just limiting it to the coop, but the setbacks around. We may look at that. I don't know that that's something that we've seen in any other ordinances, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. So staff is more than willing to generate some additional research and evaluate some other options that we can share back.
We should do that, but let me just say, there's a problem. And so I would say to the folks that have children, do what you can to make it quieter so we don't have problems.
We talk about this again. We talk about the process. So people are applying for a permit in the future for permits 3 through 10. Someone doing an on-site visit, or someone doing, right? So maybe we mitigate this ahead of time. So again, it's 2 separate issues. That's an ongoing one, but that's not the issue of tonight. I think in terms of the permitting process, we could maybe make some tweaks to potentially see something like this.
I guess the question, we can walk you through briefly what that process looks like. Staff that is involved in that is here. We don't have to do that tonight. I do think there are, as Jeff said, I think based off of the way the ordinance is structured today, when that on-site inspection was done and the permit was issued, it met the requirements of the ordinance. So I think it's more a question of if there are tweaks to that process or to that to what those criteria are. That is something that we can certainly generate some additional research on.
I have one question. So if we're in the process of adding a 3rd and 4th license, kind of put a moratorium on that until we figure out what types of tweaks, if any, we want to make to the ordinance. Like 5 through 10 until, the thought is given, since we, I think recognize that there may be some need to tighten the ordinance. Is that something to consider?
I guess I would rather say to folks that are looking, remind them that we might change our ordinance and we might find, I don't want to say no.
Yeah, I'd like to review some things that I'd like staff to look at. I'm a big one for could be sayings, and one of my favorites is every yes is conditional. Every yes is conditional. I'd like staff to take a look at the idea of, I'll call the backyard pen. So it's beyond a coop, but it's a backyard pen. Possible landscape improvements, that would be possible. I don't know if there's a timing issue on any of this. I'm a city boy, so I don't know much about chickens, but maybe there's a timing issue. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, sound mitigation, there's some discussion on that, see if that's possible. And then, as we take a look at some of our neighbors, I seem to recall there are differences in the number of chickens that are allowed. That might have an impact on sound levels and that sort of thing as well. So if we're gonna make a informed decision, I think we need a little more information. Thank you.
Apparently trustee Rubin, who's on phone, wants to say something.
Howard. Thank you. To follow up on Dudley's point, I was thinking one of his points, he had more than I had, as usual. But the timing was one in particular, and especially being a dog owner, I'm certainly sensitive to the notion of, well, occasionally my dogs are going to be in the yard and barking, but I sure as heck try to make sure it's not in the middle of the night waking up the neighbors, although sometimes I fail there too. But if, we don't want chickens cooped up, as the technical phrase is, but perhaps at night would be something we could require, along with some soundproofing, dampening of the coop itself. Maybe that could be a big help. I will tell you that, especially in places where there's smaller lots, that means everybody's doing their landscaping at different hours all summer long, and the number of leaf blowers making a huge amount of noise, but we all just kind of have learned to accept that with our neighbors is something. So we're never going to find a perfect solution to eliminating all noise from the chickens, but I do think hopefully between allowing or requiring taller, solid fences, other noise or visual dampening, limiting methods, foliage, etc., keeping the birds cooped up during certain hours so they're not bothersome at night. We should be able to come to something here where people can get along with each other and allow this. Thank you.
Do you feel you guys have enough guidance? Ms. Thompson, we're going to want to hear from you as we're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. We're looking at limitations. Okay? When these chickens make your life miserable and when don't they? So we want to try to get this right for you and for your neighbors that have pets that are chickens. Well, thank you, everybody. We knew when we did this in 2022, we were guessing. Yes. It appears we didn't totally guess right. Our best to fix it. So, it's a good place for everyone. And thanks. Stay in touch with us. And, everything you can to make it quieter. We have a half-acre lot. You don't have to do anything. If you have a quarter-acre lot, you're on top of your neighbors. That's right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. All right, the next item on the agenda, which we're going to have in the room, is a discussion of these building code updates. And I'll ask our Development Services Director, Taylor Bassler.
Thank you, President Allen. So this is a very much an initial discussion about our building code update process that we're starting right now. There's different options that we have as that progresses. We're really looking for some initial feedback from the board. So as mentioned in the staff memo, right now we're operating under the ICC, that's the International Code Council 2015 International Building Code, which covers all of our commercial and family buildings, and the 2015 residential code. And we are starting the process of updating to the 2021 or the 2034 codes. I That's gonna be a 3 to 6 month process, and that's starting very, very soon. We are intending to work with an expert consultant on this, to help us through that process, to make sure that we're meeting all state requirements, and also importantly, that we are correctly picking up and updating all of the Glencoe specific amendments to those international codes. These are standard building codes that many communities across the country use, that we've adopted. We've also made them with So as we go through this, we also want to talk about how our building codes might help us advance some of the priorities that the work has been talking through over the past several years, and these are historic preservation and environmental. So again, the process that's starting now, this is something we are doing, is updating 2015 suite of codes, again, 2021 most likely. We're doing this, we need to be in compliance with state law, which is we need to do it. It's going to give us improved construction and sustainability related outcomes just by updating. These are really the basic foundational codes that we use. There are insurance benefits also through this. Again, we're working with a consultant on this, and they have recommended that we likely move to the 2021 codes just because the 2024 codes are not fully operational yet. But this is an ongoing discussion we're having for the next few months. Just briefly, changes that you'll see when we move to this newer suite of codes, most of them are very technical. There's a lot of technical changes, the way we do walls and but there are also some improvements to energy efficiency, wind protection, fire protection, lighting, etc. that will be part of this. So just by going to 2021 and 2021 codes, we should see at least some improvement in our sustainability related outcomes. Talking about historic preservation, there has been quite a bit of discussion over the last several years, led by the Preservation Commission, but also involving the Village Board and the Zoning Commission on what we can do to encourage the preservation of our existing building stock. We've been working with these groups have been working together on some potential updates, especially to the zoning code, and some more policy-based incentives dealing with things like review permits, permit fees, etc., that are intended to help us encourage preservation. Outside of that, there are a limited number of really preservation-focused building code options that we have. One that's been discussed on a few occasions is the International Existing Building Code, the IEBC. This is a code that's part of that ICC suite of codes that encourages the use and reuse of existing buildings. This is for things like changing occupancy type, renovation. There's several paths within this code that allow you different options for renovations, alterations without necessarily bringing the entire building into full compliance with the most updated version, which can often be a make or break proposition for renovating versus demolishing a building altogether. However, this code is not intended for use with single family residential, which is really kind of the core of our building here. The majority of our building here is single family residential. So this is something to think about as we go through this process. We could consider adopting the IEBC. Could work for our downtown buildings, for multifamily. Not likely to have a big impact on our single family residential. We do our interpretation of the International Residential Code, which we use for single family residential construction, does allow for limiting the amount of code upgrades that are needed based on the scope of work, especially the location of work. So some of that is already in play with our IRC. Environmental sustainability. There are quite a few more options here, kind of an array of options from the strongest, really kind of the weakest and the strongest, but the things that can have the biggest impact and potentially also the more stringent requirements for builders. Again, updating our ICC codes, which is something we're definitely doing, is going to just by itself provide some benefits when it comes to environmental sustainability. But these are the base codes. So as we talk about these options, we're not looking for any final decisions tonight, but we're looking for just an overview of what some of these options might be. These codes can potentially be layered on top of the base code. It's not a either or. So we'll have our 2021 or 2024 base codes, and then there are several other options which are outlined in some more detail in your memo. Some of these are the requirements of the U.S. Green Building Council. A lot of people are familiar with these. It's a third-party certification. There's different levels for it, different requirements. Related to that is the International Green Construction, number 3, I'm talking about number 3 next, the ICC National Green Building Standard. This is another one that comes out of that ICC International Code Council suite. It's similar to the various certification levels, third-party certification, you met those levels. Again, this one is actually suitable for single-family use. There's also the International Green Construction Code. This is good, intended for commercial multifamily. This really encompasses the building itself, but also the site, deconstruction of old buildings, and so on. And finally, there's a new one, the the Illinois Stretch Energy Code. And the memo mentions that we currently operate under the Illinois Energy Conservation Code. It's a state energy conservation code, and this is a new option, which is not effect in 2025. It's kind of an enhanced version of that base level state energy conservation code, which covers things like heat pumps, electric vehicle readiness, electric appliance readiness, improved building envelopes, and so on. That's something that we could consider adopting as well. As we talk about all these things, these are not things that these additional codes beyond the immediate code update. We don't necessarily need to do this all at once. These are things where we could do our base code update, which is something we know we need to do in the coming months. And as we go through the process of completing our sustainability action plan and the comprehensive plan, that could really inform our decisions about what direction we want to take here. And we could layer some of these other codes on top of it if we determine that's as we come out of those processes. So it's not something that we have to do all at once. This is really more of a kickoff conversation. More additional considerations. Some of these do have increased construction costs. 2 to 10% is kind of a rule of thumb you hear from LEED. The National Green Building Standard is typically slightly less from my research, but also fairly similar. That's the ICC related, similar to LEED certification. And the same goes for the green construction code. It can be more than this, also decreasing costs. So that's something to consider. Administrative costs, plan review and inspection. You might need to find more specialization. If you're looking to more specialized codes, which could be an increased cost for the village, which could also be considered in light of potentially trying to give people incentives to do these things. I'll skip to number 4 there, mandatory versus voluntary. It's another conversation to have. How many of these things we want to require people to take these further steps towards sustainability and preservation, rather than offering incentives to do so. So it's worth considering how those incentives might interact with potentially higher costs for the builders and the village. The other side of that is long-term cost savings. There has been research that's been done that there are higher upfront costs to green building, but there are also typically not significant long-term cost savings with energy savings. So all this is to say that this is an initial discussion we're looking for tonight as we kick off this process in the next few months, and as we work with our consultant on this, is to get the board's feedback, initial feedback and direction on what's important to you, what we should be talking about with our consultant, what more research we need to be doing as we look into these various options throughout this process. Back over to the board.
Well, let me just say, when we planned the clubhouse, one of the things we did was go, oh, we're going to try to do a heat pump. So, and we recognize that just build to those standards, but not have the extra expense certification, unless somebody thinks those were mistakes. I think as we go forward for fire, the village by the same standards, which is we should be looking at, we're in favor of sustainability, we want to go as far as we can without crushing our residents. But we should not make them spend extra money on certifications that we didn't think were warranted when we're doing it ourselves. Because it's easier for us to say, we think our residents should do this in a sustainable way, even if it costs a little more, if we can say it with a straight face, that it's going to pay for itself. Otherwise, nothing.
Having been a former community development director and also a consultant to the ICC on their codes, I wanted to suggest some additional areas that we might want to look at. One would be a required deconstruction and reuse code that has some advantages, not only for sustainability, but the owner who deconstructs and uses a nonprofit can take a tax advantage. There's a plus and minus on that one. But some of the severe weather we've been encountering, there is a national model fortified or severe weather code that's being promoted by the insurance industry, which is kind of interesting. Also, I guess this relates a little bit to the historic preservation with demolition tax. Some communities have, like our neighbors in Highland Park and some other places. And then, of course, if California is a bellwether for what's happening in other areas, they have looked at, and I believe there's no more natural gas hookups allowed. We're not there yet, but I think we need to be thinking about stuff that might be coming down the track. On that stuff. So with the board's permission, I'd like to work with staff on that report. But if you want me to step back, I will as well.
No, I look. I don't provide any expertise on any of the stuff we do. So I rely on experts, but here you have it. So I think that's useful. Can we do some of this stuff? We're not home rule. Demolition tech, for example.
That's a question that I don't have an answer to off the top of my head. I know there's questions that we would have to, as you know, wouldn't be so much tax as a fee.
Yeah.
And we would have to tie certain cost structures back to that fee structure. So I think we couldn't simply replicate, for instance, what Highland Park has done. They've created that tax for a purpose. So I think that's a question we're looking at. I would say as we think about some of the other components, there is a demolition recycling code that or ordinance that we are subject to that Cook County has in place already. I think Trustee Underdog is suggesting perhaps that we look at something that's a step further than what the county is doing. That I think is a question of whether we have home rule authority to do, or as a non-home rule unit, whether we have the authority to do that. But if these are worth looking at, certainly, there's been a lot of conversation nationally relative to Florida and hurricane impacts from a standpoint of their building codes, which were hardened pretty substantially in the early 2000s to help limit some of the severe storm damage and buildings that were built after that time versus before. Obviously, we don't have hurricane issues here yet, but that's a broader conversation that's happening in Illinois as well, relative to stronger and more frequent storm activity, whether those codes hardened. There's a lot of conversation around standardization across the entire region. So I do think those are worthwhile things. Taylor's mentioned it. I think it's worth mentioning again. Sustainability Task Force has made the recommendation to the village board that a sustainability action plan be pursued. That is something that we are including resources for in the draft budget that we'll present to you all next month. I would anticipate that a process that would bring us a sustainability action plan would likewise have some measure of recommendation around further enhancing green building standards. And we may want to look at those in context to that plan. And that would provide us time to research, study, and examine. And as Taylor said, that doesn't necessarily hold us back from adopting the updated codes that statutorily we're required to do, but it would give us perhaps more time and data around what those kind of further enhancements might mean. So, that I think is part of the reason we wanted to bring this to you all as we commence that code update process, is to make sure that if you want us to start pushing some of that sooner, we do so. If you think maybe we need more research, more data around some of these, that the time is there for us to do that. And perhaps, again, it aligns with the sustainability action plan discussions that will take place during the course of the coming.
Other comments?
Yeah, the question I had, are we relatively close to being able to do the ICC code update to 2021?
We're taking that off.
We're pretty close on that one. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying we need to do all of them, and I'm not saying we need to do everything right away. And then the model, state model conservation code, we had a brief conversation on that.
That's right.
Is that ready to go, or?
Well, that is, my understanding that we can't adopt that until, if we wanted to, that's the stretch code. So there's a standard whether that's now we adopt automatically the Illinois, the IECC, and then there's the Illinois stretch energy conservation code, which is new.
Okay.
And that, I don't think you could adopt that before January 1st of next year.
Okay.
And that's my understanding of it, and it's not an expert's understanding. It's basically an enhanced version of the standard IECC, which some.
And that's a state model.
That's right. Yes, it is based on the state model.
We can look at that in the context of as Taylor said, and we're working on the 21 or 24 code updates.
Okay, terrific.
Thank you for your presentation. Just a quick question, couple of questions, maybe some comments. You indicated we're statutorily required to update because we have a deadline.
Yes,
What is that
so
deadline?
we need to be in progress by the.
So like
My
now.
understanding. We will be.
Okay, and I guess I also have a hard time visualizing what the difference between the 2024 codes are. So as we move, I'm for progress. I am on the STI, the liaison to the village board. I encourage this, I think we're in the right direction. I just would like to see maybe what are the differences? What are we talking about with energy efficiency? What's the difference? Lighting, fire suppression, what key differences, because those do translate to also expenses. And I'm wondering if you can also maybe provide some scenarios. I'm more interested in single family development, single family home development. I don't want to outprice some people that want to build here, but in a scenario, a new house, what if you're just doing an addition, what does that mean? Remodeling a bathroom, what does that mean? Just some scenarios that maybe quantify some of this for me, will help me going forward. forward, but not to add too much work to anyone's, but just as we move forward, I think that would help everybody, because obviously it's a little bit extra.
So you're looking specifically between, as we decide between 2021 and
Yeah.
24.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna probably know relatively quickly. As Taylor said, the problem with 24 codes is that the structures around those newest codes aren't fully developed. And so if we integrate them before the state has given us the guidelines to do so, because my preference is to go as new as we can, because we don't do this that frequently. The last time we did it was in 2017, I believe.
Oh, yes, we updated in 2015.
Adopted in 2015 and 2017. And it's a process, right? And we, I think, want to make it as easy for the development community also to understand what it is that our codes are. So I think that's the analysis that we're going to be commencing relatively quickly. And also trying to get a timeline for when those guideline documents are finalized and finished with the state. So we can certainly circle back on that. And then, but we're going to need to get underway with that process pretty soon.
To builders or just presented some of these, you mentioned it, we have a lot of, many coming our way.
We have not yet. No. We've not. This is the first step.
And all we need to do is to comply at this point, is to start the process.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do that. Look, the village said we want these environmental responsible. But it's important as we make changes that are more complicated, more expensive for our residents. Let's make sure we're in a position to say, okay, this is gonna be more expensive and more complicated, but here's why it's good. Here's why it's gonna save you money in the long run. Here's why we'll all be able to stay free. Here's why your house is burnt down. So we should look for that too. I don't want purchasing. Anybody else? Okay. It's good as we go ahead. Okay, next item is review and discussion of the, I don't know, Gary, want to say anything?
Thank you. No, I'm gonna,
Okay. So next is a review and discussion of a draft village Glencoe proclamation policy, and I'll ask our communications manager.
So historically, the village has adopted proclamations recognizing significant dates of contribution of individual organizations within the community or celebrations of local, state, or national significance. However, there has been no formal guidance or policy that the village has had that points to why, how, or what we would consider in terms of proclamations. So we are recommending an adoption of the policy, just formalizing what our current practices are. Something to point to for defining why we wouldn't issue a proclamation if certain councils brought to our table, and outlining the review process and how they are adopted and shared with the community. So ultimately, we're just asking for feedback on this policy, whether or not you have any comments or concerns, and then we would bring this for formal ratification at a future village board meeting.
And to be clear, so draft was circulated. We all looked at it. I had a question when I looked at it, but I was leaving proclamation, not resolution. And I think, understand it, I think this looked good. And with the caveat that if we start working with this, we decide, oh, wrong, we either want to do it or we don't want to do it. But we have the flexibility to act and then tinker with our policy. That understanding, I
village attorneys did review this as well, so it's passed their seal of approval.
There are some confusions. There are communities that do both proclamations and celebratory resolutions. And they ask me what's the difference.
Well, you know, we had resolutions about guns after
Ones that were specifically, that did not have a legislative actual impact that stated, made a statement of policy, rather than honoring something.
right. The resolution said to our representatives in the state legislature, U.S. government, do something about this. You're specific. This proclamation policy is not dealing with that. We're going to have a proclamation. And again, I think it looks sensible to me, understanding what is going. Anything else? Okay, you guys have enough guidance. So the next item is a review and discussion of updates to the village's communications plan. Sam, you're on again.
So the village already has a communications plan. It was adopted in 2017 and modified minorly internally in 2019 and 2023. It ultimately guides what we disseminate to the public and to the media, and outlines responsibilities of staff internally in terms of who our spokespersons are, as well as what our graphic and style guide is. We have not reviewed it with the board or our village attorney since 2017, so we are bringing it back to you guys with some slight modifications, primarily to adopt our current practices and with the adoption of also a social media use policy for the recommendation of the village attorney. So I'll get into the social media use policy just a little bit. This outlines terms of use, prohibited content, and disclaimers for the use of social media, as well as emphasizes the right of the village to remove any user content deemed in violation of the policy or any applicable law or court order, primarily in how the public will interact with them. So because it is a policy, we want to make sure you guys are comfortable with it before we were to ratify it at a future board meeting.
So it turns out that there are some legal constraints, you know, with waiting on my understanding, but I just want to make sure that work with our village attorneys so that when we decide what we're putting up, or likely what we're taking down, we don't find ourselves in.
I will say part of the reason we're talking about it is because of that, and we've had conversations with the village attorneys about content from time to time. Not so much content that we are posting, but content that may find its way to a post that we make. Given the fact that the village correct. Given the fact that the village uses social media so extensively now in terms of pushing information, it's become more important that we ensure that we have a policy that staff is able to rely on if there is a situation, and we haven't had one that comes up, but those situations exist in a lot of communities. And again, this is a model policy that we received from the village attorney. So
as long as we're dotting our legal I's and crossing our legal T's.
sometimes we cross our legal eyes too.
Well, I think the key thing here is that most communities get in trouble with this when, rather than applying constraints on or applying rules in a uniform manner, they tend to take down comments that they find to be derogatory to either the job that employees or elected officials are doing. Or they may not politically agree with. And that is classic viewpoint discrimination. That doesn't mean that the comments section of the village's Facebook page, Instagram, or whatever, TikTok, that those become a free for all. In the same way that when you had people doing Zoom bombing during COVID of meetings and putting up pornography, that's not free speech. You don't have to allow every type of speech just because there is some limited public forum. The key here is not to be, this is a forum that we have created on third-party platforms. And so I've seen violent sexual pornographic content that is fully allowed. Now, prohibiting some of that on someone else's private property, that's when we get in trouble with the First Amendment. This is not a problem. We have some modicum of control. Prohibiting comments regarding discrimination. Now, as we know, this is where you could get into some sticky areas, especially when you're talking about some of the topics that some people's viewpoints on what the appropriate responses in public policy against discrimination are. So we'll be working very closely if someone is using that. Promotion of business, product, services, you can't use this. This is not a garage sale. Can encourage legal activity, can make threats to any person, cannot send me information that may compromise the safety and security of any public systems, whether it be security of village hall or water system or a parade route, or a police response or a parade route. Anything that violates copyright. And so these are standard guardrails that many communities in Illinois and elsewhere have adopted, and they do hold that.
This is also just to add to that policy that we will post on our social media pages. Reference to it.
Yeah, there's no secret.
Anybody else?
Yeah. I just want to congratulate staff on the work that's been done on the communications with the citizens, even in my short time on the village board. Our weekly newsletter gets better and better and longer. The employee newsletter gets better. I think it's great, especially with the demise of our local press. And we just don't get the coverage.
Except for Dan.
He doesn't, but he doesn't get to go to every meeting. And there's a vacuum out there, and I think it's important that we make the effort to let our citizens know what we're up to. And often people will say to me, well, why'd you, I said, well, how'd you find out about this? And they would say, oh, I saw it on the weekly newsletter, and it's a good thing.
Okay. If there's anything else, see how you got up there. That's great. Thanks for the hard work. That's it. Is there any other business? Yeah, I'd love to pass meeting. There's a chance we could close session, but we've run out of time. So if there isn't any other business, is there a motion to adjourn our committee of the whole?
Second.
Been moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.